The photographs were on the table, printed, full color, crisp, the kind of images that make a room go quiet without asking. The Canadian Geographic Expert, 44 years, field research across 61 countries, a man whose career had been built on the premise that he had seen everything the natural world had to offer and had the published papers to prove it, picked up the first photograph and looked at it for a long time. Then he set it down, picked up the second, set it down, picked up the third, and then he did something that none of his colleagues in that room had ever seen him do in 44 years of professional geographic fieldwork. He laughed. Not from joy, from disbelief, from the specific cognitive discomfort of a trained scientific mind encountering something that refuses to fit inside any category it has ever built. He slid the photographs across the table toward his team and said with the absolute certainty of someone who has never been wrong about landscape, "These are generated. Nobody runs a filter this aggressive on field photography and calls it documentation. This is AI. This is not a real place." He was looking at photographs of the Philippines. Every single image was completely unaltered. And in 6 weeks, he would be standing inside one of them, boots wet, mouth open, every instrument on his person giving him data his brain was refusing to process, feeling something crack open in his chest that 44 years of fieldwork had never once produced. Welcome to Archipelago Archive. Subscribe now to join our mission of documenting the legends the world ignored. The year was 2023. The location, a geographic research institution in Vancouver, Canada, a city that considers itself fluent in natural beauty, mountains that drop directly into ocean, forests so dense they have their own weather systems, coastlines that have been photographed so many times they have become the international shorthand for the word spectacular. Vancouver is not a city that is easily impressed by landscape. Its residents have grown up inside a postcard. They have calibrated their sense of wonder against some of the most dramatic natural scenery on the planet, and they wear that calibration with the quiet pride of people who know what beauty looks like and have long since stopped being surprised by it. The Canadian Geographic Expert, whose name had appeared in the acknowledgments of 3 National Geographic special editions and whose field research on coastal geomorphology had been cited in 47 peer-reviewed papers, had been presented with the photographs as part of a research collaboration proposal from a Philippine university. The proposal was straightforward: a joint documentation project covering 4 of the Philippines' most significant natural formations: the Chocolate Hills of Bohol, the Underground River of Palawan, the Batad rice terraces of Ifugao, and the Tubbataha Reef Natural Park in the Sulu Sea. The Philippine team had sent preliminary field photographs to establish the visual scope of the project. Standard practice, the kind of professional exchange that happens between research institutions dozens of years without incident. Except these photographs were not standard. They were not the carefully composed, heavily processed images of a tourism campaign. They were raw field photographs taken by a Filipino geographer named Dr. Mariz, 41 years old, 15 years of field research across the Philippine archipelago, a woman who had spent her career documenting the natural world of her country with the rigorous precision of a scientist and the deep, unconditional love of someone who had grown up inside it. Dr. Mariz's reaction to her photographs, AI generated, not a real place, nobody runs a filter this aggressive on field photography and calls it documentation, this is AI, this is not a real place, traveled back to Dr. Mariz through the research collaboration channel within 24 hours. She read the message sitting in her field station in Palawan, a ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, the underground river visible through the open door as a dark green shimmer between the limestone cliffs. She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to her department head with a single line of her own. Sige, imbitahan natin siya. Fine, let us invite him. Her department head, a man who had been navigating the gap between Filipino scientific achievement and international institutional recognition for 30 years, read her message and smiled for the first time that week. In a barangay near the foot of the Chocolate Hills in Bohol, an old man named Lolo Ambo, 78 years old, a retired science teacher who had been teaching local children about the geological formation of their landscape for 50 years without a single academic paper to his name and without ever needing one, heard through his granddaughter that a foreign expert had called the Chocolate Hills fake. He looked out at the hills through his window, those perfect, improbable, ancient cones rising from the flat earth like something dreamed rather than formed, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Hayaan mo, darating siya at makikita niya." Let him be. He will come and he will see.
To understand what the Canadian expert was about to walk into, you have to understand what the Philippine landscape actually is. Not as a tourism product, not as a geographic category, but as a living, specific, deeply strange, and deeply beautiful reality that has been forming for 65 million years, and that the Filipino people have been in intimate daily conversation with for as long as they have existed as a people. The Philippines is not simply a beautiful country, it is a geographically improbable one. It is an archipelago of 7,641 islands sitting at the intersection of four major tectonic plates, the Pacific, the Eurasian, the Philippine Sea, and the Australian, a collision of geological forces so complex and so sustained that it has produced natural formations that exist nowhere else on Earth in the same form, the same density, or the same extraordinary combination. The Chocolate Hills, over 1,000 perfectly conical limestone formations rising from the floor of Bohol, each one covered in grass that turns chocolate brown in the dry season, do not exist in the same form anywhere else on the planet. The Puerto Princesa Underground River, a navigable underground river running through a vast cave system directly into the sea, is the longest of its kind in the world. The Batad rice terraces, carved into the mountainside of the Ifugao highlands 2,000 years ago by hand, following the natural contours of the land with such precision that they remain perfectly functional irrigation systems today, are considered one of the greatest human engineering achievements in history. The Tubbataha Reef, a remote atoll in the Sulu Sea, accessible only by live-aboard boat, contains more species of coral and fish per square meter than any comparable reef system on Earth. If you believe in the untapped power of the Philippines, hit that subscribe button. It helps us find more stories like this one. Dr. Mariz had spent 15 years documenting all of this with the rigor of science and the intimacy of love. She had developed what she called pagmamahal bilang pamamaraan, love as methodology. It was not a romantic concept, it was a scientific one. She believed, and had built a body of research to support the belief, that the most accurate documentation of a natural landscape required not just technical precision, but genuine relationship with the place being documented. A researcher who loved the landscape they were studying would notice things that a detached observer would miss, would return in different seasons, different light, different weather, would build the kind of longitudinal understanding that produced not just data, but wisdom. Lolo Ambo had taught this same principle for 50 years without ever calling it a methodology. He had taken generations of Bohol children to sit in front of the Chocolate Hills at different times of day and simply look, not measure, not classify, look. He believed, and he said this to every class he ever taught, that the hills had something to teach that could not be learned from a textbook, that the specific quality of the light on the hills at 4 in the afternoon in March, when the grass was at its most completely brown and the sky at its most completely blue, was a lesson in itself. Not a lesson about geology, a lesson about what it meant to live on the earth and be changed by what the earth showed you. The invitation to the Canadian expert was extended with the full formality of a research institution: credentials, project scope, access permissions, logistics. But it was Dr. Mariz who added a handwritten note to the formal package. It said simply, "Come and see. Bring only what you can carry. Leave room for what you will find." The Canadian expert arrived in Manila on a Tuesday morning in April, the beginning of the dry season, when the Philippine light is at its most uncompromising and most beautiful. Dr. Mariz met him at the airport with 2 research assistants and a vehicle packed with field equipment. She was wearing field clothes, practical, slightly faded, the clothes of someone who spends more time in the landscape than in institutions. He was wearing the equivalent. They shook hands with the professional courtesy of 2 scientists beginning a working relationship. He did not mention the AI comment. She did not mention it either, but it was in the room between them, the way things are when both people know and neither person has decided yet what to do with the knowledge. The first site was the Chocolate Hills. They drove from the airport to Bohol by plane and ferry and road, a journey that took the better part of a day and gave the Canadian expert his first sustained experience of the Philippine landscape in motion. He was quiet for most of the journey, not the quiet of someone bored, but the quiet of someone whose senses are receiving more than they are accustomed to processing. The colors were wrong, not wrong as in incorrect, wrong as in outside the range of what his calibrated Canadian eye had established as the palette of the natural world. The greens were too saturated, the water was too blue, the sky at dusk coming into Tagbilaran was a shade of amber rose that he had never encountered at that latitude, and that his atmospheric science background told him should not be that color at that altitude at that time of year. He said nothing, but Dr. Mariz, watching him from the front seat, saw his hand move toward his camera 3 times on that drive and pull back each time, the gesture of a man whose professional skepticism is fighting a losing battle with his eyes.
They reached the viewing platform above the Chocolate Hills at 6:15 in the morning of the second day, deliberately timed by Dr. Mariz for the specific quality of the early light. What the Canadian expert saw from that platform at 6:15 in the morning in April in Bohol is something he would spend the next several months trying to describe in academic language and eventually give up and describe in the only language that was adequate. I have stood on every significant landscape on 6 continents. I have documented geological formations that took 100 million years to build. I have been trained to see the natural world as a system of processes and forces and measurable phenomena. What I saw from that platform at 6:15 in the morning was something my training had not prepared me for, not because it was beyond science, but because it was beyond my prior conception of what science was describing when it described the Earth as beautiful. He stood on the platform for 47 minutes without speaking. Dr. Mariz stood beside him and said nothing. She had stood on this platform many times. She knew what it needed. It needed silence and time. The Palawan Underground River was the second site, the Batad rice terraces the third, the Tubbataha Reef the fourth. At each location, the same progression occurred. The Canadian expert's professional skepticism, his scientific instruments, and his 44 years of field experience, all arriving at the same conclusion through different pathways, that what he was seeing was real, was documented, was measurable, was scientifically explicable in every particular, and was simultaneously more extraordinary than anything his career had previously shown him. His field notes from the Underground River used the word impossible 4 times in 2 pages, always crossed out and replaced with the phrase requires further framework.
At Tubbataha, he ran out of superlatives entirely and simply wrote coordinates and species counts in silence for 3 days, which his research assistants recognized as the sign of a scientist encountering something that has temporarily exceeded his vocabulary. But what happened on the 3rd day in Bohol, in a worn canvas bag carried by a 78-year-old retired teacher on a bicycle, was something nobody in the international geographic research community had ever seen before. And what the Canadian expert said when he finally understood what he was holding changed the terms of everything he thought he knew about who had been paying attention to this landscape all along. Stay with me, because what comes out of that canvas bag is about to make everything else in this story make complete sense. Dr. Mariz had arranged the meeting without telling the Canadian expert what it was. She had simply said, "There is someone who wants to show you something." Lolo Ambo arrived at the research station on a bicycle, 78 years old, unhurried, carrying a worn canvas bag and a hand-drawn map on paper so old and so handled it had the texture of fabric. He set the map on the table and invited the Canadian expert to sit. The map was not a geological survey. It was a seasonal map of the Chocolate Hills drawn from 60 years of personal observation, showing which hills changed color first in the dry season, which held moisture longest, where the wind moved differently between the formations, which viewing angles at which times of day produced which specific qualities of light. It was the most detailed observational document of the Chocolate Hills that the Canadian expert had ever seen. It had never been published, it had never been digitized. It existed in one copy, on paper that was older than the Canadian expert's entire academic career. They talked, through Dr. Mariz's translation, for 6 hours. Lolo Ambo showed him the map section by section, explaining not just what he had observed, but how he had learned to look, how he had taught children to look, how the hills looked different to someone who had grown up beside them than to someone who had arrived with instruments. Not better or worse, different. The difference between a frequency you can measure and a frequency you can feel. At one point, the Canadian expert asked Lolo Ambo how long he had been documenting the hills. The old man looked at the map for a moment. Then he said through Dr. Mariz, "I have not been documenting them. I have been listening to them for 60 years. Documenting is what you do when you are not sure something is real. Listening is what you do when you know it is." The Canadian expert was quiet for a long time after that was translated. Then he said something that Dr. Mariz later described as the most honest thing she had heard a foreign researcher say in 15 years of international collaboration. "I called your landscape AI-generated. I want you to know now what I actually was saying, that I could not believe something this real existed without me having known about it. That is not a statement about the Philippines, that is a statement about the limits of what I had allowed myself to know." The listener listened to the translation. Then he nodded slowly, not in forgiveness exactly, but in the specific acknowledgement of someone who has heard this admission before and knows what it costs to make it. He reached into his canvas bag and produced a second document, older than the map, smaller, pages stitched together by hand, a guide to the Chocolate Hills written in Visayan, compiled by Lolo Ambo's teacher 50 years before him. A 110-year-old document of Filipino geographic knowledge about a landscape the international scientific community had spent decades studying without ever asking the people who lived beside it what they already knew. He placed it in the Canadian expert's hands. The Canadian expert held it for a long time. His field notes from that day contain a single line that is not a measurement or an observation. It reads, "I came here to document a landscape. The landscape was already documented. We just never thought to read what was already written."
There's a concept embedded in Filipino relationship with the natural world that has no equivalent in any Western scientific framework. It is called kalikasan. In its simplest translation, it means nature. But in Filipino usage, in the way a Bohol farmer uses it when talking about the Chocolate Hills, in the way a Palawan fisherman uses it when talking about the Underground River, in the way an Ifugao elder uses it when talking about the rice terraces, it means something closer to living kin. The natural world not as a system to be studied or a resource to be managed, but as a relative to be known, respected, and listened to. The understanding that the landscape has its own knowledge and that the human relationship with it is not one of observer and observed, but one of two parties in a conversation that has been going on for 65 million years, with humans being the more recent and less patient participant. The Canadian expert returned to Vancouver 4 weeks after he arrived. He submitted his collaboration agreement to the Philippine University Research Office within 10 days of landing, the fastest institutional response Dr. Mariz had ever received from an international partner. The joint documentation project ran for 3 years. The papers produced by the collaboration were published in 4 of the world's leading geographic and environmental science journals. One paper, co-authored by the Canadian expert and Dr. Mariz and Lolo Ambo, whose 60-year observational record was formally incorporated into the research methodology for the first time, was cited by the United Nations Environment Program in a report on indigenous knowledge systems and natural heritage documentation. Lolo Ambo's name appeared in an academic paper for the first time at the age of 78. Dr. Mariz told him about the citation over the phone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mabuti naman," that is good. Then he went back to watching the hills. The photographs that the Canadian expert had called AI-generated were eventually published as part of the Joint Project Visual Documentation Archive, unaltered, exactly as Dr. Mariz had taken them, with a formal note in the publication acknowledging that the images had initially been questioned as artificial. The note was Dr. Mariz's idea. She had insisted on it, not as a rebuke, but as a record, evidence that the natural beauty of the Philippines had been so completely itself, so entirely and uncompromisingly real, that a trained scientific mind encountering it for the first time had reached for the only explanation that seemed adequate, that someone must have invented it. Nothing had invented it. It had invented itself over 65 million years on 7,641 islands in the company of a people who had been paying attention the whole time. The Canadian expert gave a lecture at his Canadian institution 8 months after returning. The lecture was titled, "What I Did Not Know, I Did Not Know: Philippine Natural Heritage and the Limits of Institutional Geographic Knowledge." The auditorium was full. At the end of the lecture, he showed a single photograph, the Chocolate Hills at 6:15 in the morning in April, taken by Dr. Mariz, unaltered, in the light that had stopped him on the platform for 47 minutes. He showed it without comment. He let it sit on the screen for a full minute. Then he said to the room, "This is what real looks like when you have never seen it before. I recommend you go and see it for yourself. I recommend you bring only what you can carry, and I recommend you leave room, a great deal of room, for what you will find." He was quoting a handwritten note he had received with a research proposal. He did not say where the words came from. He did not need to. Dr. Mariz was in the auditorium. She was sitting in the 3rd row. She recognized her own words when they came back to her across an ocean and a season and a changed mind. She did not say anything. She simply looked at the photograph on the screen, her photograph, her country, her 65-million-year-old home, and felt the specific, complicated, deeply Filipino pride of someone whose truth has finally been received by someone who was finally ready to hold it. Some places are beautiful, some places are extraordinary,
And some places are so completely, so specifically, so irreducibly themselves that the only way the unprepared mind can process them is to conclude that someone must have invented them. The Philippines did not need to be invented. It simply needed to be seen by someone willing to set down everything they thought they knew and pick up only what the landscape was willing to teach. The world is beginning to see it now, and it is discovering that 65 million years of geological imagination produces something that no artificial intelligence, however sophisticated, however powerful, however trained on every image the human world has ever made, could ever generate. Because the Philippines was not made for human consumption, or human comprehension, or human categories of beautiful. It was made by the earth itself, for itself, in the full extravagant privacy of deep time. And it has been waiting with the infinite patience of mountains and reefs and underground rivers for the rest of the world to finally arrive and find it real.
Every island holds a secret. Every barangay has a legend. Subscribe and stay close. Next, we uncover another beautiful story of a Filipino legend. Tell us in the comments, which Filipino legend should we unearth next?